Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring digital minimalism with its author, Cal Newport. This book challenges the way we use technology and argues for a more intentional, values-driven approach to our digital lives. Cal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sunny. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're right, digital minimalism is about reclaiming control over our attention and time by aligning technology use with what truly matters.
So Cal, let's start with a feeling that I think is almost universal now. This sense of unease, that our relationship with our phones and our apps has somehow become coercive. It doesn't feel like we're always in charge. What's really going on there? Well, what's happening is that we found ourselves in a lopsided arms race. Most of us think of these tools as neutral, but they're not. Insiders like the former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris have been very clear about this. These technologies are engineered to hijack our minds. The quote you see here really captures it perfectly. They are, quite literally, designed to put slot machines in our pockets. The goal is to maximize the time you spend engaging with the screen.
That's a powerful claim, engineered to be addictive. Can you break down the specific psychological mechanism they're using to do that?
Absolutely. It comes down to a well-understood concept from B.F. Skinner's work in behavioral psychology: intermittent positive reinforcement. It's the engine that drives slot machine addiction. You pull the lever, and most of the time you get nothing, but every once in a while, unpredictably, you get a reward. That variability is what makes it so compulsive. Social media platforms replicate this perfectly. Every time you pull down to refresh your feed, it's like pulling the slot machine handle. You don't know if you'll see a like, a new comment, or just nothing. That gamble keeps you coming back, over and over again.
Wow. Okay, so it's clear we're up against some powerful forces. To help our listeners really grasp how to fight back, I thought we could structure our conversation around a few key ideas from your book. First, we'll dive deeper into this trap of the attention economy, and then the philosophy of minimalism you propose to counter it. After that, we can get really practical with your 30-day digital declutter, then talk about what it means to reclaim our lives, and finally wrap up with this idea of joining the attention resistance. How's that sound? That sounds like a great plan.
Perfect. So let's start at the beginning. This trap you call the attention economy. You've developed a whole philosophy in response to it. Could you tell us about that?
The philosophy I propose is digital minimalism. Now, the first thing to understand is that it's not about being a Luddite or hating technology. It's really a philosophy of intentionality. The process is to start with your deep values, your family, your community, your craft, whatever is truly important to you. And only then do you ask, what is the best way to use technology to support these values? The most important part of the definition, though, might be that last phrase: happily miss out on everything else. It's about trading that fear of missing out for the confidence that comes from being deliberate.
I love that idea of building from your values up, instead of from the latest shiny new app down. Can you give us a model for what that kind of thinking looks like in the real world? A fascinating and perhaps surprising example is the Amish community. There's a common misconception that they reject all technology. They don't. They're actually incredibly sophisticated technology evaluators. When a new tool comes along, they don't ask, is this convenient or is this cool? They ask one question: does this technology support or undermine our core community values? They'll test it, sometimes for years, and if they find that, say, a car would cause people to go to other towns for church and weaken their local community, they'll reject it. It's a powerful, disciplined example of putting values first.
That Amish test is a great mental model. But I think for most of us, the default assumption is that more is better. More apps, more services, more ways to connect. What's the flaw in that thinking? The flaw is that we ignore a fundamental principle from economics, the law of diminishing returns. Think about an assembly line. The first worker you add provides a massive boost in productivity. The 10th worker adds a little less. The 100th worker might add almost nothing and can even get in the way. It's the same with our digital lives. Your first few key technologies, a Maps app, a way to text your family, provide immense value. But as you add the 20th app or the 3rd social media network, the small benefit you might get is completely swamped by the massive costs in terms of your time, your focus, and your attention.
Okay, so we have the philosophy, we have these guiding principles, but for someone who's listening and feeling completely tangled up in their digital life, the inertia can be overwhelming. Where do they even begin to apply these ideas? That's the key question, and it's why I developed a very concrete, practical process to get started. It's designed to break that inertia.
I call it the digital declutter. It's a structured 30-day process. The first step is to take a 30-day break from all optional technologies. These are the things you can step away from without getting fired or causing a major problem in your life. The second step is crucial. You don't just sit there bored. You have to actively explore and rediscover high-quality, real-world activities. You fill that new space with something meaningful.
Then, at the end of the 30 days, you start from a blank slate and reintroduce technologies one by one, but only if they pass a strict test. Does this tool truly serve something I value, and is it the best way to do so?
What kind of results have you seen from people who go through this process? I imagine it can be quite transformative. The results are just profound. I ran an experiment with 1,600 volunteers before I wrote the book, and the stories that came back were incredible. One participant, Kushbu, read 5 books during his declutter, the first books he'd read for pleasure in years, and he rediscovered his childhood love for painting. Another man, a father named Harold, realized he'd been missing all his son's small victories at the playground because he was always checking his phone. He rediscovered the simple, deep joy of just being present with his kids. People consistently rediscover things they thought they'd lost.
Those stories perfectly illustrate the next crucial point. Once you've cleared out the digital clutter and created all this space, the big question becomes, what do you fill that space with? This is really the heart of the matter, reclaiming our lives. Exactly, the declutter is just the beginning. The goal is to build a life rich in things that are genuinely satisfying.
One of the first things you argue we need to reclaim is solitude. Now, can you define what you mean by that? Because I think for a lot of people the word just means being physically alone.
That's the key distinction. I use a very precise definition of solitude. It's a subjective state where your mind is free from input from other minds. It's not about geography, it's about what's happening in your head. You can experience deep solitude on a crowded subway if you're just thinking your own thoughts. And conversely, you can be physically alone in a remote cabin, but if you're scrolling through a social media feed on your phone, you are experiencing zero solitude. It's an internal state, not an external one.
That's such a powerful distinction. Why is that state, that freedom from the input of other minds, so critical for us? Because it's the only state in which we can do deep thinking, process emotions, and come to understand ourselves. I love the historical example of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. The White House was complete chaos, with people constantly coming and going. It was impossible to think. So for long stretches, he would commute to a quiet cottage on a hill outside the city. It was there, in that solitude, that he was able to grapple with the immense moral and strategic complexities of the war and formulate the ideas that became the Emancipation Proclamation. That is work that simply cannot happen amid constant distraction.
So if solitude is that crucial for something as monumental as the Emancipation Proclamation, what is happening to us now in an age where we can fill every single spare moment by pulling out a phone? What's happening is a new and, I think, dangerous phenomenon that I call solitude deprivation. For the first time in human history, it is possible to completely eliminate any time spent alone with your own thoughts. Every moment waiting in line, walking to your car, or sitting on the couch can be filled with digital input. And we're seeing the consequences. There's research showing a sharp, sudden spike in anxiety among young people that correlates almost perfectly with when smartphones became widespread. When we lose solitude, we lose the ability to process our world and our place in it.
So solitude is about our relationship with ourselves, but what about our relationships with other people? I mean, isn't the whole promise of these tools that they help us connect? This is another area where we're making a bad trade. We're replacing high-quality conversation with low-quality connection. Conversation is high bandwidth. It's nuanced, it's synchronous, it's rich with facial expressions and tone of voice. It requires empathy and builds deep relationships. Connection, on the other hand, is the low bandwidth, asynchronous interaction typical of social media. The perfect example is the like button. It's a quick, shallow hit of approval that provides social validation without any of the effort or depth of a real conversation.
So we need real solitude and real conversation. What about the rest of our free time that we reclaim? How should we think about leisure? The key is to replace the passive, low-quality digital distractions that just kill time with what I call high-quality leisure. This refers to active pursuits that usually require some skill and effort, things you pursue for their own sake. Playing an instrument, learning a craft, playing a sport. These activities are challenging, but they generate a deep, lasting satisfaction that scrolling through a feed can never provide.
Can you expand on that idea of skilled leisure? Why is it so much more satisfying? I think the philosopher-mechanic Matthew Crawford puts it best. He talks about the value of craft, of working with your hands in the physical world. As he says in this quote, when you're building or fixing something, you have to reckon with the infallible judgment of reality. Either the motorcycle engine runs or it doesn't. You can't talk your way out of it. This provides an incredibly deep and unambiguous source of self-worth that is a world away from the fragile, shallow validation you get from posting a photo online and anxiously waiting to see how many likes it gets.
For listeners who are inspired by this and want to start cultivating more high-quality leisure, what are some practical first steps they could take? A great place to start is to just learn a simple, handy skill. And ironically, a tool like YouTube is an incredible resource for this. You can learn basic woodworking or how to fix a leaky faucet. You can also prioritize social forms of high-quality leisure. Joining a board game group, for example, creates a structured, fun social setting that doesn't involve screens. Or you could even follow Benjamin Franklin's example and start a club with friends dedicated to self-improvement or a shared interest. The key is to be an active creator of your leisure, not just a passive consumer.
Cal, listening to all this, it feels like it adds up to something more than just a set of personal habits. In the book, you frame this final step as something bigger, almost a movement you call joining the resistance. What do you mean by that?
I frame it that way because I think it's important to recognize what we're up against. Digital minimalism isn't just a productivity technique. It's an act of resistance against the powerful forces of the attention economy.
What exactly are we resisting? What is the attention economy? It's the dominant business model of the modern internet. It actually began back in the 1830s with the first mass-market newspapers, which realized they could sell their papers for cheap or give them away, because the real product wasn't the news, it was their readers' attention, which they sold to advertisers. Today, companies like Google and Facebook have perfected this model to a degree that was once unimaginable. They have become some of the wealthiest companies in history by mining a single resource, not oil, not gold, our time. Our eyeball minutes, as it's sometimes called in the industry.
So, if we're up against this massive trillion-dollar economic force, what are some concrete tactics people in this resistance can use to fight back and protect their attention? The single most effective tactic is to delete social media apps from your phone. That one act breaks the cycle of intermittent reinforcement. If you need these tools for your work, use them like a professional. Access them on a desktop computer with tools that filter the noise on a schedule. Another powerful tactic is to change your hardware. Embrace a minimalist phone that is intentionally dumb, one designed only for calls and texts. Ultimately, all of these tactics are rooted in a single mindset shift. Begin to treat your attention as your most valuable asset, because it is.
Cal, thank you for walking us through digital minimalism. This conversation gives our listeners a clear framework for using technology without letting it use them. And it really leaves us all with one final, critical question to reflect on. Is your technology serving your deep values, or are you serving its bottom line? Thank you, Sunny. I hope these ideas help people build more meaningful, focused, and intentional lives.